Hi, welcome to Jewelry Week 2022. I'm JB Jones.
And I'm Bella Naiman.
And we are so excited to share our virtual 2022 program with you here. We invite you to head to our website at NYCJewelryWeek.com to see everything else we're up to, virtual programs and in-person programs in New York. And I'm going to pass it to Bella to tell you about what's coming up next.
We're really excited to have this program called Gold Dust, What Makes the Metal So Alluring, hosted by Amy Elliott. It's a 360 conversation about why we love gold. So take a seat and enjoy. And if you have any questions, do feel free to leave them in the comments. Even though we're now live, we will certainly make sure that all of the panelists receive your thoughts on it. So thanks so much and enjoy.
Hello, jewelry enthusiasts, professionals, and collectors. I'm so happy to be part of the 2022 edition of NYC Jewelry Week and leading a conversation about one of my favorite topics, gold. For those of you who don't know me, I'm Amy Elliott. I'm a contributing editor at JCK, the leading jewelry retail trade publication. And I also write about jewelry for a number of other outlets, including the International New York Times, where I recently published an article about our fascination with gold and why we seem to be drawn to it in times of economic and geopolitical unrest. So this is a topic I am more than happy to get into, and I have some wonderful experts here to help me unpack it from all angles today: financial, art historical, and of course, the jewelry defense. So let's meet our panel. First, I have Anya Cowan, who brings an economic point of view to our discussion with 20 years of experience in financial markets and trading precious metals. He has held trading roles at a number of international banks, including JP Morgan, Standard Bank, Bear Stearns, and TD, and in the corporate mining sector as well. Anya, welcome.
Thank you.
Next, please meet Dr. John Stuart Gordon, who is Yale University Art Gallery's Benjamin Atmore Hewitt Curator of American Decorative Arts. Dr. Gordon's exhibitions for Yale include The Architect's Table, Swid Powell, and Postmodern Design, which was 2007 to 2008, and A Nation Reflected, Stories in American Glass, 2019. His most recent exhibition, Gold in America, Artistry, Memory, Power, in 2022, this year, surveyed the role of gold in American art and culture across 70 examples of American gold objects, as well as paintings, photographs, and other works of art. The exhibition closed this summer, but he is currently expanding this curatorial oeuvre on gold into a book. Dr. Gordon also teaches a survey of American silver at Yale. Welcome, John.
Thank you. I'm thrilled to be here.
And last but not least, the award-winning UK-based jewelry designer Dominc Jones, who currently serves as creative director for 886 by the Royal Mint. After debuting his eponymous line in 2009, he has become a 5-time winner of the British Fashion Council's New Gen Award and served as creative director for iconic British jewelry brands Links of London and Astley Clark. I'll be asking about 886 by the Royal Mint and how it relates to our, and presumably his, fascination with gold in our talk today. Thank you for being here, Dominc.
Hi, thanks for having me.
Great. So Anya, I'd actually like to kick things off with you, given your knowledge of financial markets. The cost of gold is something that the jewelry industry is constantly talking about, but even to insiders, it can be baffling to understand how and why the price of gold fluctuates. This is how jewelry retailers are determining their prices, and it's a moving target. So what triggers an increase or decrease in market value?
Well, that's a great question, Amy, and I could probably spend a really long time going through it. So I'll try and give you the abridged version. There are really 4 major areas that affect the price of gold, and that is interest rates, currencies, mainly the US dollar, geopolitical risks, and inflation. So out of all of these influences, I would say that the most important one is actually interest rates. So interest rates tend to have a negative correlation to gold. When they go up, gold tends to go down. And why is that? Well, when you take money and you invest it in something like a stock or a bond, you receive a yield on your investment. You'll receive a coupon payment if it's a bond, or you'll receive a dividend payment if it's a stock. Gold is a non-interest bearing asset. You receive nothing for holding it. The only way you actually make money in gold is if the actual value goes up. Now, in a world of rising interest rates, there's an opportunity cost. So, for example, right now, 2-year Treasury notes are trading at about 4.5%. So you could take that money and invest it at 4.5% in a Treasury or a money market account versus gold, which is not going to give you anything. So there is this demand where people are deciding to sell their gold in order to invest it in something that's going to actually give them some sort of yield. And that's one of the major reasons why we're seeing this downward pressure. It was interesting if anybody watched the price of gold yesterday after the Federal Reserve meeting. They had their announcement at 2:00, and the headlines were interpreted that maybe the end of the rate hiking cycle might be coming closer to an end. And what you saw gold rally $20. Then what happened is we had the press conference at 2:30 where Powell said that the end rate was going to have to be much higher than they had originally thought possible. And then we saw a $40 drop in gold. And that's telling you exactly how sensitive gold is to these move in interest rates. So besides the interest rate side, we have the dollar. Now, back in the 1930s, President Roosevelt made it illegal for individuals to have gold. So they had to turn it into the US government. And what that created was the world's largest reserve of gold. And that's where Fort Knox came from. So fast forward to the end of World War II, and what the world decided to do was when they got together to stabilize their currencies is they pegged the US dollar to gold because the US had the most amount of gold in their reserves. So that is how the US dollar became the world's global reserve currency. And that is why gold is priced in US dollars, oil is priced in US dollars, silver, all the grains. So there's a huge influence when we see a big movement in dollars. And we have seen that. So if you look at a trade weighted basket of gold or the dollar index, since 2021, the dollar has gained about 20% in strength. So that's going to make it much more expensive for people in other countries to actually buy gold. And that will decrease the demand. And with the Federal Reserve going through a quantitative tightening program where they are removing or selling back the bonds into the system that they had purchased during COVID, there's an actual shortage of dollars in the system, and that's pressuring gold. So you now have this scenario where higher rates, stronger dollar, both really causing a negative effect on gold. Now, gold and the US dollar are not always negatively correlated. You will see a time when gold and the US dollar will rally together, and US treasuries. And that is the sort of third area, which is this geopolitical risk. When there are times of uncertainty, there's what we call a flight to safety, and people look to invest in safe haven assets. And in that time, they will look to buy gold, buy dollars, and they will look to buy US treasuries, which actually, when they buy treasuries, the yield goes down. So there are times when all three will come together. We did see that in March when the start of the Ukraine war happened. We did see a $200 rally in gold. It went from about 1880 to 2070 before it came off. And so that's sort of the third area that will affect the price of gold. And last, we'll come to inflation. And everybody has this concept that gold is an inflation hedge. Now, if gold was purely an inflation hedge, what you would see is you'd have to look at real yields. And what is a real yield? A real yield is the return on an investment minus the rate of inflation. Now, if gold really was just an inflation hedge, it would have a real return of zero. And that's not what we see in gold. The real return is all over the place, which tells you that there are a whole bunch of factors and underlying influences that affect the price of gold. So in the big picture, the long run, inflation will play a role in where gold will head, but this sort of short-term choppiness moves tend to be driven by flow, which are much more correlated to interest rates and the US dollar. And unfortunately, both of those are working against gold at the moment.
Anya, that was a wonderful, detailed response. And so I'm going to dumb it down for myself, which is, how are people investing in gold? What is the tangible object? Is it bullion? Is it gold coins, like, or is it something? Is it what is the physical object, or is it not a physical object?
Well, there are sort of two real pools of buyers for gold, right? There is the investment community, and then there is what we would call the retail community. If you're, a huge hedge fund, you couldn't possibly buy enough gold coins to get the exposure that you want to gold. So the retail community are really the buyers of physical. And we are seeing a huge demand in that. The year-on-year numbers, our retail sales are up about 36%, and I think quarter-on-quarter they're up about 41%. And the reason that they're in there buying coins, and they will tend to buy coins or the small, bars, is that they're able to afford it. I mean, a typical 400-ounce bar, which is the picture that you see in all the pictures of gold, and they've got them all stacked up. At current prices, that's worth about $650,000, and most people don't have $650,000 to buy a bar, but they can squirrel away and save for a coin here, or there, or a small bar. And so the retail are really the ones that are buying it, and there is a premium for owning coins. So a lot of investors do like that as well.
So they're literally taking the product and the physical gold items and putting it away in a safe for a rainy day.
Yeah, and so the thing is, there's a constraint to how much can be actually minted, right, with the refining capacity. And I'm being told right now that there's possibly up to a 2-month lag to get a 1-ounce bar of gold. So there is just a huge demand that they can't be met. And so, people do store the gold. There's a number of reasons they would buy it. It's not for sort of the end of the world type scenario, but people do like to own it against the debasement of their currency. Now, in recent times, we have seen this. We have seen this in Venezuela, Turkey, Argentina. They've all debased their currency. So there are people that buy it for that particular reason. Then you're going to see investors who just like to have a portion of their assets in something that's tangible, something they can hold, something they can look at. Gold as a coin is so easy because it's very small volumes. You can hold a very large volume of cash in a very small size. You can easily transport it. It's easily sold. So for all of those reasons, people do like to own the physical coins and bars.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. John, so how do Anya's comments square with your research findings for the gold exhibition? It covered 400 years of gold in America. When I interviewed you for the Times, you told me gold has great historical weight as a material of beauty and artistry, but also one of power and bloodshed, of emotional as well as financial value. But I'd like to know why. What do the events of history tell us about our relationship to gold?
Well, I think Anya really spelled it out beautifully, and you see this contemporary world mirrored in history. And the recent articles about debates over King Tutankhamun's tomb and the size of it and how it was filled. So this fascination with gold spans culture and has spanned millennia. And there's always been a link to this material to the divine, to religion. And of course, there's a link to money, as gold kind of undergirds most economic systems. Even before we had formal economic systems, gold was the main one of the main exchange currencies. And you have the love of this material fueling so many parts of society, but you also have it fueling empire. And if you look back into the 16th, 17th century, we talk about Columbus looking for a new path to India for the spice trade. Well, the spice trade is also underwritten by the exchange with gold. But if you look at Spain and Portugal, the entire conquest and colonization of the Americas was a quest for gold. And when those early conquistadors came and they saw the palaces and temples of these incredible civilizations, the Aztec, the Maya, the Xenu, all decorated with gold, they started pillaging this material, assuming that there would be endless stores of it. And this is where ideas of El Dorado and the city of gold come from, that really fueled popular imagination in Europe for centuries. Of course, they don't find any gold. What they find is silver, and silver and gold are always kind of next to each other in terms of value and in terms of exchange. But this culling of gold and silver and the movement of it across the oceans becomes a political tool. And for my research, I did a historical newspaper database search. I put in the word gold and pushed return, and a couple million hits came back. This is only research one could do during the pandemic when you need some kind of therapy and hours to fill. But I was struck by even as early as 1704, 1705, there are articles in colonial Boston talking about the ships that are leaving Central America back for Spain. And they're describing the contents in terms of how much gold there is in the form of coin, in the form of bars, in the form of what they call dust, what we would call like nuggets or unprocessed or unrefined gold. And, these articles are not invitations for piracy, because news moves so slowly. So by the time an article arrives in Boston, the ship has already made its way to Spain. What it is, it's imperial posturing. England and Spain were enemies. They're showing off to each other how much money they have. And it just so all of these ideas of gold being allied with inflation or with geopolitics, it's there in the historical record. And if gold is not there literally, it's there metaphorically. If you look at some of the most important trade goods and some of the most important kind of economic goods, gold is there as a metaphor. Porcelain and ivory are called white gold. Oil is black gold. So even this idea of when this material isn't there as a means of exchange or a quest for power, it's lurking there in the background in the imagination of what we find most valuable and worth fighting for is gold.
And there's an emotional element too. I think that it has accompanied when your exhibition was filled with so many personal anecdotes and personal objects of sentimental value. And I think you and I had discussed about how gold has has marked can plot point the events of someone's life.
Oh yes, I often say that gold hits the three main important moments of the life: birth, marriage, and death. And you see these clusters of objects, birth presents, communion presents, christening presents, then wedding rings or betrothal rings or marriage gifts, and then mourning rings, or objects that are placed in a will to transfer wealth, but also family connections across generations. And you see these kind of flowerings of where gold clusters, and they tend to be these really emotionally heavy moments in our lives.
I know that the exhibition has closed. It closed this summer, but when you look back, what pieces were the heroes? I mean, I know there was some incredible jewelry on display in the exhibition.
It's always a surprise. I was so proud of the deep historical research I did in some of these objects and uncovering stories of ownership and what these objects may have meant a couple hundred years ago. There's a coral and bells. It's kind of like a really deluxe teething ring. It's a piece of coral that a baby would teeth with, decorated with bells, and you wore it around your neck. I was so proud of it. It's a extraordinary Rococo object. I thought that was going to be the star, but you never quite can guess what the public will like. And I think the real star was a bangle bracelet by Noma Copley, which is a contemporary work, and it's in the form of a pencil. So imagine just a yellow Dixon Ticonderoga pencil bent into a circle and fashioned out of 22 karat gold with a piece of coral for the rubber eraser. And maybe people don't understand the Rococo or a teething ring right away, but everyone understands a pencil. And I was fascinated. I was kind of peeking in on the social media around this show. it was the pencil that kept getting posted. And I learned that there's a whole cult of people who love Noma Copley's work, and they were so excited to see it. So that, I think that was our sleeper hit.
That's
I'll never
amazing.
I
I do. I mean, I learned a lot about that pencil too, and I observed the same as you. Yeah, she now she's somebody I follow and all that kind of stuff. So, well, thank you. So, Dominc, I want to turn to you now because you're a contemporary jeweler, a star on the rise, and you are part of the 21st century narrative of jewelers drawing people in with the irresistible allure of gold. And the pieces by 886 by the Royal Mint are entirely what I would call metal forward, a celebration of the metal itself. So can you just tell us more about the work you're doing right now?
Sure. I mean, it kind of ties through to what's just been discussed as well. When the Royal Mint came to me with the kind of idea that they wanted to create a jewelry brand, they said, they had quite a blank canvas and said, like, what would you do with a jewelry collection for the Royal Mint? And I kind of went back to the starting point and the kind of reasonings for the Royal Mint to exist in the first place, which is to create a secure provider of a hold of value through precious materials, and I wanted to kind of translate that same concept into the reasoning for the jewelry as well, to kind of celebrate the kind of old-fashioned reasoning for jewelry as a hold of value. I think it's certainly not a new idea, far from it, but I think jewelry as a kind of as a design language has almost moved away from that quite severely, like certainly on a popular level, where its design value was almost more important than its materials in recent times, with the rise of demi-fine and everything. And I kind of wanted to come back to this idea of a simplicity and a kind of honesty and open dialogue around the material itself and its weight and its value and its proportions and scale and all of those sorts of things.
So as a designer, as most designers do, I mean, they have a personal relationship with the materials that they work in. What is your personal relationship to gold? I mean, do you remember the first time you worked with it? How does it perform at the bench versus other metals?
Yeah, it's really lovely to work with. I mean, I actually came to gold quite late in my making career because it's an expensive material, and certainly when I was at university, I couldn't necessarily afford to be making things in it. And actually, my first brand was all made out of brass because I was really into big, chunky sculptural pieces that I personally couldn't afford to make in gold. Which I PR'd quite well into a decision rather than a reality that I was faced with. So the first piece that I made in gold was actually for a charity auction. It was in collaboration with an ethical emerald mining company called Gemfields, and for a thing for the World Land Trust. And I made this ring, which was actually bought by George Harrison's wife. So, yeah.
Nice.
So it did quite well for my very first piece.
I'm so glad you got that in there. That's very cool.
Yeah. It's honestly the first time I ever made a piece in gold.
And how does it perform at the bench? I mean, just when I mean, I just for our audience to understand, I know it's very different. The physicality of working with the material.
Yeah, it's beautiful. It's got a really a lovely density to it. It moves really softly. I'm really interested. I mean, I'm not the greatest personal maker, but the things that I'm really good at is creating form and shape, and I really enjoy finishing and polishing and a refining of the surface and getting it really, really beautiful and clear. And there's nothing better than gold for that. You can get it really, really, really fluid and really, really mirror finished. It's just a gorgeous material to work with, particularly if you've been handicapped by circumstance and have been used to working with silver and brass and things like that beforehand.
So as you look to expand this particular collection that it seeks to that invites consumers to sort of, appreciate the metal for the metal itself and its inherent value. I mean, do you think that today's consumers understand that gold is a store of value, or is it strictly aesthetics and personal taste that's driving their purchase decisions?
Oh, well, I think that probably is across lots of different people. There will definitely be the consumers that understand the value of gold. There will definitely be. I think there's a almost willful confusion within some online brands, and as we've moved jewelry into an online space, and the way that some retailers and who aren't necessarily specialists in jewelry or precious metals, there's almost a willful confusion of customers in the way that they describe it. I see lots of things like dipped in gold. What does that mean? It doesn't mean anything. So I think there's obviously some consumers that won't, but there will be some that will. I think it's certainly something that, in terms of like a store of value, I would imagine that in future it will become more and more relevant. If I look at the generation below me, there's a much greater sense of an understanding of what they're buying and the value that what they buy holds. I mean, I don't know a 17-year-old or a 16-year-old that doesn't have a Depop or Vestiaire account and doesn't buy strategically, knowing that what they're going to buy, they're going to resell. And I think that as those generations move up the food chain of their purchasing, I think it will have a greater influence in the next decades.
I was looking at some of the pieces in your collection, and there are some interesting hallmarks on the pieces, and you've almost incorporated them in a way that is kind of an aesthetic component, but it does drive home this message of value. Can you just explain a little bit of that? Yeah.
So the Royal Mint has been a provider of precious metals for a long time. There's been some really interesting people that have been previous creative heads, like Sir Isaac Newton was a creative head of the Royal Mint, and he was brought in to impart security through design in coinage. So how do you make things more secure? And those elements were things that we brought into the way that we've created jewelry. On a very base level, hallmarks are there to kind of give a clarity on what the material is. At the Royal Mint, we have 2 extra hallmarks to anyone else in the UK, which is the Tower of London, which is the home of the Royal Mint, and the crosslet, which was gifted to us by Queen Victoria. And hallmarks are a series of struck symbols into the metal that kind of denote lots of different things. Beyond that as well, we also live in an age where laser engraving is way more accessible than it ever has been. And one of the conversations we were having, or I was having with the Royal Engravers and the teams at the Royal Mint, was how can we as a company create more security through our designs? And there was things like caustics, which was something that had been conceptualized by Sir Isaac Newton when he was there, which is, if you think of a glass of water that you place on a table in a sunny day, it fires off light around it. And so caustics is the controlling of those rays of light. And we've managed to develop a way of striking into the surface through micro engravings that we can fire off an image that you can't see on the surface. As well as things like that, we have this year in the UK, we had the Jubilee hallmark, which was to celebrate the Queen's 70 years. And that hallmark is an interesting one because obviously she passed away in this year. So it becomes even more special. And in a way, that hallmark adds value to the piece just by having it, as it becomes more collectible.
Absolutely. Okay, great. And then Anya, I'm coming back to you. At this precise moment, would you advise investing in gold in the form of jewelry or the form of bullion, the way people invest in Home Depot stock, and what is more valuable, the gold bullion or, my necklace?
So from like a purely investment point of view, you're better off to buy bullion in coins or in bars. They do trade at a premium. But then there's also something to be said about jewelry. It's something that is an investment you can wear, you can show off, you can hand down for generations. This was my great grandmother's. And so there's an intangible value you can't really place on the jewelry. So, if you were to ask me strictly as an investment point, I would say gold, coins, and bars, but you can't really forget about the jewelry side either.
Yeah, the sentimental. And then if you were going to be the person that's not going to buy bars and coins, you're going to buy as many gold necklaces as your hot little hands can carry. Can you speculate based on what you know? I mean, your insider information, can you speculate as to how much it would appreciate?
Well, I think at some point the world is going to realize that things are different. We have had basically 40 years of globalization, and we've had an arbitrage in labor and energy costs by being able to move our production over to China. And sort of since COVID, we've seen a complete breakdown on what we know. And we've seen, we've had all these supply chain issues, and people are going to start moving manufacturing out of China. We no longer have cheap energy to Europe from Russia. So I think we're going to be moving to a world of higher inflation, and we haven't seen that. And so one of the things we always joke about in the financial markets is, well, you can't say you've seen this before unless you're about 70 or 80 and you were trading back at the 1970s and the 1980s. And so I think at some point the world will realize that we are set for higher inflation. The central banks will realize they can't keep pumping cash into the system. And I think at that point, you'll see that there will be an unprecedented demand for gold. The key, as always, is timing. And that's really hard to get.
I know that gold, did top at $2,000 a year or so ago. And now it's the message I get from retailers that I speak with and from designers that it's level, and that when it's consistent, there's consistency, then you don't have to worry too much about pricing this, one collection to the next. It's when it's so volatile. Can you speculate as to, can you speculate as to any, volatile crises coming our way that could create some more inconsistency? I think the jewelry industry just wants things to be consistent, because the consumer obviously will buy gold no matter what it costs at this point. But internally, are you just like, what are you guys worried about? What could be the trigger? What's the trigger that we should be on the lookout for?
Yeah, well, that's a $1 million question. I think that and this is sort of where you've almost had, we've never had a collection of, well, first of all, we haven't lived through a pandemic. And then at the same time, what we've had this surge in inflation that we've never seen before. And so people don't really know what to do. And I think that has caused a massive increase in volatility. And I can understand from the jeweler's point of view, and even from those in the markets, we would like things to be nice and orderly, and things to sort of calm down. And of course, it's very difficult right now with what's going on in the situation in Russia and Ukraine, that, will there be a nuclear war? And so there's a lot of geopolitical risk that's still kind of, in the background. And so I think what we'll see is, hopefully we'll eventually see, a peaceful end to that, so the geopolitical risk dies down. But what we're really looking for is, we're looking for the central banks to basically come to an end of the hiking cycle. And once we sort of have that, I think we'll find that gold will likely find some sort of bottom, and we'll find that volatility actually does come off. And that's better for everybody, because you can understand, if you're making jewelry and you buy it today, and then the next thing you know, it's, by the time you've actually made it and designed it and put it out, it could be significantly different to where you actually made the purchase of gold. And that makes it really difficult.
Thank you. And Dominc, just anecdotally, have you, do you have a sense of how, do you have a personal opinion as to how gold jewelry, that's made today will appreciate over time? I've interviewed designers that say, I made this ring 5 years ago and it's like quadrupled in the value alone of the ring, has quadrupled just in 5 years. I mean, don't quote me on this specific number, but is this anything that you've observed in your sector of this conversation?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, the gold prices goes up makes the value of gold jewelry more expensive, I think. But also, I mean, if you look long term, like the things that make a piece of gold jewelry more valuable over time is the provenance of the designer, the quality of the manufacturing, and the history of the company that made it or individual that made it. So I think the things that will make your piece of jewelry that you buy now is the relevance of the individual maker, how they're perceived within your like current market and your current generation, and thinking strategically about that. I mean, say for example, with the brand that we've designed 886. It's a new brand. We launched it this year, but it's attached to a company with 1,100 years of history in precious metals. So the risk element of buying from us as a new brand and the chances of it becoming more valuable over time are a lot less than an unknown designer off of the internet. There's a kind of certainty with our company specifically that it will become a future antique because it is so attached to such a historical institution.
I just have a quick question for you about 9-karat gold. I think a lot of UK jewelry designers are, showing up in a lot of US editorial, and we are very much conditioned. 14K, 18K is the gold standard. So, can you help people in our audience understand what 9-karat gold is and why it's special?
I mean, 9-karat gold is as you'd expect, just a lower quality, a lower grade of gold. I think there's been a kind of, it was very popular in the 90s in England, where there was a rise of like kind of popularist mass market jewelry that was made in it. It then lost popularity. In the last like decade or so, we've seen the rise of like luxury costume and demi-fine jewelry, plated. And then I think as those kind of hit peaks, there's kind of been a move back certainly in kind of like a mid-consumer towards 9-karat as a way of like, particularly for guys. I feel like it's quite a good one for a young guy because it's not gonna rub off. You can wear it rough and tumble and it will still look like what it will look like. It's an accessible price point without it being a piece of like gold-plated silver that, depending on your pH level, may come off really quickly or slowly. So it's got its pluses and its weaknesses. It's obviously not as beautiful in color. It's a duller tone. It's closer to a brassy color, but it is a gold in its properties.
Wonderful. Okay, John, I want to let you have the last word in this conversation. Because you have the perspective of history, and your exhibition and your book lays bare all the ways in which gold has accompanied the story of America's rise to power. What do you think our relationship to gold is right now? Knowing what you do about enslaved people, how these historic titans of industry amassed their fortunes at the expense of human life, etc. And there's the environmental aspect. So I'd like to know, what do you think our relationship to gold is right now at this precise moment? And then what should the gold lovers in our audience be thinking about when they make their next purchase or reach for their favorite gold charm bracelet in their jewelry box? No pressure.
A really easy question to end on. I think something that Dominc was saying was so right on. There are these historical patterns that we see play out, and we're in the middle of another one all the discussions of the maker's marks and how that's become a design component. If you look back to 17th century, 18th century metalwork, you see the touch marks right on the front of objects. It was only in the 19th century that they kind of got squirreled underneath where you didn't see them. So I think our relationship to making and to the materials is part of a larger continuum or a cycle. And I love that kind of the historical inflection in how we recreate and reinterpret historical practices. And part of the idea of, do you buy bullion or a bracelet? I understand the plug for bullion, but also knowing that when you buy a bracelet, there's the value of the material, but there's the value of the workmanship. And so you're not actually just buying a material, you're buying something larger. And I think what Anya and Dominc said about the emotional attachment and a vote of confidence in the maker, that is a huge thing. If you look at historical records like Paul Revere's shop records, the American patriot silversmith, he might charge someone X amount, maybe 30 pounds of silver for a coffee pot, but only a few shillings for the making. It was really the material was first and the making was second. Today, we've almost flipped it, where a small amount of material, but with a great name, that's where the value is. And so there's this panoply of options. I think as we understand more about history and we understand more about our own priorities, it becomes really useful lenses for understanding objects. In my exhibition, I had a set of gold spoons that historically had been associated with a Boston merchant, with a little bit of digging, and I mean a little bit of digging, we discovered he was a merchant, but he was a merchant of human beings, and he was actually one of the most prominent enslavers working in Boston in the early 18th century. And it brings to the forefront the fact that to have the economic wherewithal to acquire gold or precious materials in a historical setting, you are tied to some of the more inequitable forms of trade. And behind every great fortune in the past, there are not great deeds. And I think, future historians may feel the same way about us today. But it doesn't mean we hide those objects away. We use that historical material to understand history and to understand where precious and loved objects fit within history. So to know that the sale of a human life or sales in contested materials like ivory or sugar create a luxury industry only helps us understand the luxury industry better. And for the contemporary consumer, we have many more issues. And I think it's a very personal thing. You have to choose what you believe in and make your purchase decisions based on that. If you are really committed to the environment and to ethical mining and ethical sourcing of materials, let that drive your choices, because there are great companies out there working to ethically source gold, gemstones, and to produce materials. If you are more interested in craftsmanship and handwork, there are so many fabulous people making things by hand outside of a factory setting. So go and find a goldsmith who speaks to you and patronize them and support their work. Or if a status symbol is very important to you, now almost every great fashion brand has come out with a jewelry line that will satisfy that urge and will give you something that you can feel proud wearing and you can show off to friends. It's all so personal now. I don't think there's one direction we can point people, but it's take the time to think about what matters in the world to you, because there is jewelry out there that will completely satisfy whatever you find important.
Just based on attendance of the show and conversations you had with patrons, I mean, how do you think the zeitgeist is feeling about gold at this precise moment?
It's all over the map. People love gold. There is something like, we are hardwired as human beings to be attracted to gold. It may be our inner magpies. We love a glinty, shiny thing. And the fact that it doesn't rub off, it doesn't fade, it doesn't tarnish. There is something magical about it, alchemical about it, that just has lasted. But then there are the people who are like, it's too gaudy for me. I like silver. And you know what? That's fine too.
They have that at the Royal Mint, don't they? Do they have that in your collection, right, Dominc?
Yeah, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
Yeah.
I wanted to say as well, it was interesting what you just touched on about the ethical mining. One thing I didn't mention about what we're doing, and one of the things that attracted me to this project, is the fact that they'd been alongside the new jewelry brand, they'd been investing in a company called Exeter Gold, which is a new project by the Royal Mint, which is extracting through cold chemistry gold from electronic consumer waste. So all of the gold jewelry that we make is made from reclaimed from circuit boards from laptops and iPhones and things like that. It's pretty interesting.
Yeah, well, and it ticks all the boxes, and I can definitely tell you that, you know, the Gen Z consumer in particular is very focused on these issues. And so the more, you know, I always tell younger designers to be loud about your sourcing. If you are, you know, making a transparent supply chain a big part of your business, be loud about it, because people care about it deeply. Anyways, everyone, thank you so much for your time. This is a wonderful discussion. I feel like we could take it in so many different directions. But I think that we've given our audience a good overview, some great tips, and educated them. And you know, I think that this has been a great conversation. So thank you, everybody, for your time today. And I will be talking to you, all of you, in some capacity soon, I'm sure. And thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
No problem. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, guys.
Bye, guys.